Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to let everybody in before we get started. Hey, hello, and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you so much to our supporters. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Saher Selod, and I am the new Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I come to ISPU with a PhD in sociology and was formerly the chair of the sociology department at Simmons University in Boston, where I'm currently living. My research expertise is in the racialization of Muslims, specifically via their surveillance. I've published 2 books, several journal articles, reports, and op-eds on the experiences of Muslims with racism and surveillance, both in the United States and globally. So I'm very thrilled to be here at ISPU, where I'm able to bring my research expertise to a space that focuses on a broader range of studies on Muslims in the US. And today we'll be talking about one of our latest polls, religious groups' views on ceasefire in the United States. So a little bit about ISPU. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that builds understanding and strengthens communities by laying a foundation of facts. As the only organization of our kind, we're the go-to source for anyone seeking information about Muslims in America and issues that impact them. We also share what we know in easily digestible ways with the general, so that it can be shared with the general public, policymakers, media professionals, community leaders, and more. Our mission is to provide objective research and education about Americans who are Muslim to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. So I'm going to give an overview of what we're going to do today. First, I will go over the study, its methodology, the key findings, and then I will be joined by Ikramullah, our Senior Research Project Manager, to answer any questions that you all might have about the poll. The crisis in Gaza, which as of this writing has claimed the lives of around 1,200 Israelis and more than 34,000 Palestinians, has captured the attention of the world. Since October 7th, several surveys have examined American public opinion on the situation. These studies examine the views of older and younger people, Democrats and Republicans, men and women, college-educated and non-college educated Americans. The missing voice has been that of religious groups, particularly Muslim and Jewish Americans, who are often perceived as on opposing sides of this crisis. So that was some of the reasons why we decided to conduct this study. ISPU's religious group's view on ceasefire is a 3-part survey that assesses the views of these 2 key American religious groups, Muslims and Jews, as well as Catholics, Protestant, including white evangelicals, and those who are not affiliated with a religious group on several contentious topics. Muslims and Jews are often perceived to be on opposing sides of the issue, so we are able to provide some data on that. And also within the US context, we were interested in what experiences individuals are having with religious discrimination, the impact of the crisis on the election year, and attitudes about where U.S. tax dollars are going. Some information about our methodology, which we're happy to answer more in the Q&A, but we sampled 330 U.S. Muslims, 316 U.S. Jews, and 550 in the U.S. general public. All participants were given identical surveys, and the survey was fielded between December 22nd, 2023, and January 15th, 2024. So part one, we released the 3 reports, and part one provides data on American religious and non-religious groups' views on a permanent ceasefire in Gaza and where respondents place blame for the ongoing violence. The second analysis highlights American religious and non-religious groups' support for candidates who back a permanent ceasefire in Gaza, as well as their views on President Joe Biden's handling of the crisis and the proposed aid package to both the Israeli military and the Palestinian people. We also look at where people are placing blame. And the third analysis looks at the level of discrimination Muslims and Jews have experienced since October 7th. The source of our poll questions come from other polls such as Pew, Reuter, Data for Progress, our own American Muslim poll. And you can learn more about it at ISPU.org at the Ceasefire poll, which we will link to and email you all as well. So to provide a little bit of context before I get into the findings of the poll, Muslims are America's youngest faith community. So this is based on the American Muslim poll that we did in 2022. 26% of Muslims are age 18 to 24, compared to Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, white evangelicals, and non-affiliated in the general public. Muslims are the most ethnically and racially diverse faith community as well. So you can see that 28% are Black or African American, 23% are Asian, including Chinese, Japanese, and then 19% identify as white, and we have 14% who identify as Arab. So a very racially and ethnically diverse group. Half of American Muslims are native born, so 50% were born in the United States, 36% are naturalized citizens, and 14% are not citizens of the US. Okay, so I'm going to go through the findings in the order that we released these reports. The first report we released contained views on a ceasefire in Gaza. So we found that the majority of Americans do indeed favor a ceasefire in Gaza. This is similar to other polls that have come out recently on a ceasefire. You can see here that 63% of the general public are in favor, support a ceasefire, 75% of Muslims, 71% of Catholics, 50% of Jewish respondents, all responded that they were in support of a ceasefire. Breaking it down by religion, we found that the majority of both Jewish and Muslim Democrats favor a ceasefire. So Democrats, overwhelmingly in the general public, support a ceasefire, 78%. We found 54% of Republicans also support it. And then here you can see that 57% of Jewish Democrats and 78% of Muslim Democrats supported it. Both Muslim and Jewish respondents trended towards Democrats versus Republicans. The majority of Jewish and Muslim young people favor a ceasefire. So when we look at it based on age with the general population and Muslim and Jewish populations, you can see that for the Jewish population, you have 54% between the ages of 18 to 29 support the ceasefire. And then it decreases as the age increases. But for the general public and Muslim populations, you can see that the percentage of people who support a ceasefire actually also increase as the age increases. So with 68% of those who are younger supporting a ceasefire and 80% of Muslims who are 50 and older support the ceasefire. American religious groups are divided, though, on where to place blame. So the general public, 37% view Hamas as responsible, 33% view both equally. And if you look at the Muslim respondents, 40% blame the Israeli government, 12% blame Hamas, and 35% blame both equally. For Jewish respondents, 10% blame the Israeli government, and an overwhelmingly 65% blame Hamas, with 19% blaming them equally. So this is where there's a divide in the data, that Muslims, overwhelmingly more Muslims blame the Israeli government than Hamas for the violence in Gaza. The majority of racial and ethnic groups in the general public favor a ceasefire. Both non-Hispanic Black, non-Hispanic White, and Hispanic respondents overwhelmingly support a ceasefire. So now I'm going to talk about the second report that we released, which are views on political candidates and aid. We found that favoring a ceasefire in Gaza was more likely to help than hurt candidates with voters. Amongst all groups, so the general public, we see it's 36%. For Muslims, 64% that they would increase support. For Jewish respondents, it was 34%. And even for white evangelicals, we see that it's 39% say that it would increase their likelihood to support a candidate. Most religious groups are more likely to view military aid to Israel as too much than too little or just right. With the general population, with the general public, we see 47% say that it is too much. For the Jewish respondents, the majority said that it was just right, with 39%, and 16% said it was too little. On the other hand, Muslims responded that the overwhelming response was that it was too much. So here you see a little bit of a difference based on religion, religious identity, and how they view support for military aid to Israel. In terms of how they viewed Palestinian aid to Palestine, Jews, Muslims, and Catholics were more likely to say aid to Palestine to Palestinians is too little or just right than too much. But again, you can see that there's a difference in the percentages. For Muslims, you have 40% who say it's too little, 33% say it's just right, 14% say it's too much. And for the Jewish respondents, 31% said it was just right, 15% said it was too little, and 38% said it was too much. So there's a difference here based on religious identity. They're more likely to say that the aid is too little or just right. The majority of US Muslims see President Biden as favoring Israel. Here again, you can see that this is overwhelmingly the majority of Muslims who took the survey said that Biden favors the Israeli government too much. And looking at it compared to the Jewish respondents, the majority felt like that Biden strikes the right balance between support for by supporting Israel. It's the right balance. Younger Jews are more likely than their elders to say President Biden is favoring Israel. So if you break that down by age, we see that it is younger Jewish respondents who feel like Biden is favoring Israel too much compared to those who are 50 plus. So here age helps us understand this response a little bit better. Okay, so finally, I'm going to talk about the final report that we released, which is based on the questions about experiences with religious discrimination. And so one thing I want to put it in context is that, obviously we know that the anti-Muslim discrimination and Muslims have been have had increased experiences with discrimination. This did not start after October 7th. So this chart shows that from 2016 to 2022, based on the American Muslim poll, that the frequency of religious discrimination that Muslims are saying that they are encountering has basically remained unchanged. So we see that Muslims remain the most likely to report experiencing religious discrimination. So 62% of Muslims reported experiencing religious discrimination compared to 52% of Jewish respondents. Both are much higher than Catholic, Protestant, and white evangelical respondents. So Muslims are most likely to experience religious discrimination in the past 12 months. This is data that aligns well with others who have found that Muslims are reporting an unprecedented level of experiencing discrimination. So the general population, you see 59% said never, whereas 24% of Muslims responded never, yet 36% said occasionally and 15% stated regularly. For Jewish respondents, 30% said occasionally and 7% responded that they experienced discrimination regularly in the last 12 months. Muslims are most likely to experience religious discrimination from coworkers or school peers. We see that 13% stated that they regularly experience discrimination from coworkers or school peers compared to Jewish respondents who were at 6% stating regularly. The general population, 7% regularly, 19% said occasionally for Jewish respondents, and 29% of Muslims said occasionally. So we're seeing that Muslims are reporting, a larger number of Muslims are saying that they're experiencing this discrimination from coworkers and at school. When it comes to the type of discrimination, who they're experiencing it from, Muslims most likely to experience religious discrimination from authority figures at work or school. So 21% said occasionally, 19% reported regularly of the Muslims that were that took the poll. For Jewish respondents, it was 15% that said occasionally and 6% regularly, compared to the general population, which is 9% regularly and 11% occasionally. So Muslims were most likely to experience religious discrimination from people they don't know in public spaces. Here we see 31% said occasionally and 14% said regularly. This would make sense given that the hijab identifies women as Muslims. So we see that this was at a much larger level compared to the other two groups. Jewish experienced it regularly, 7%, and then occasionally at 28%. And then the general population was lower. And then we have, finally, Muslim students were more likely to experience religious discrimination than non-students, something that we can think about in this moment as we're seeing what's happening on college campuses, more recently with the arrests in New York. But so if we look at Muslim students who are in colleges and universities and vocational schools compared to those who are not students, you see that the student population is reporting a higher level of discrimination, any discrimination compared to non-students, from peers, from people in places of authority, and then also in public places. Okay. So I just want to end with, I hope that you all will consider joining our mailing list at www.ispu.org to sign up. You can read the full report on our website. We'll link to the research that is shared in the chat, and we'll also follow up with an email with the report. And we hope that you will share this report and the data that we've collected in your networks. The whole purpose of this is to have a positive impact and to share data that would be useful. So please do share the reports, the data, and we will have more resources that are relevant to this topic to share with you. So I'm going to stop here and invite my colleague, Erum, to participate in the question and answer portion of this webinar.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Maybe while we wait for some questions to roll in, I think I would like to ask sort of a probing question to you, Saher, as kind of to the point that you ended on. If you could speak to how those people in our audience or those who have read the research, how can they use the data in the work, in the different various spaces that they're in?
Yeah, thank you. So one of the ways that I think that this report is really important in this moment is for those working in universities and on college campuses who are unsure how to address anti-Muslim sentiments, Islamophobia that's rampant on college campuses. So now we have data that shows that Muslim students are actually reporting higher levels of discrimination. So this is really important for them. I know that in this moment, a lot of my colleagues in academia who study anti-Muslim racism or Islamophobia are being asked to speak across the country at various universities and colleges because their students are reporting a high level of both anti-Semitism but also Islamophobia. So here we have data to show them that Muslims are where Muslims are experiencing it. So this is one place that I think is very important for college people who are working in DEI, college administrators could use this report. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, we can go to some questions now that are coming in the Q&A box. I can take the first one because it's more methodological. So there's a question, what do you estimate would be the increase in the validity of your questionnaire results if you were to double the size of your sample? So thank you so much for the question. To refresh the memory, we had around 300 Muslims and Jews and 550 members of the general public take our survey. In terms of question validity, we actually pulled many of the questions that we asked, as Saher mentioned, were pulled from existing surveys. And that does speak to the validity of those questions because they've been used in other polls. And so that is a way of validating those actual questions. In terms of what a larger sample size would possibly allow us to do, would be to do some further analysis on the data, perhaps breakouts by racial ethnic groups. So it would basically increase the power of our analysis and allow us to do more in-depth analysis of those data.
Great. I can take the next one. Okay. So the question is I noticed that Catholics seem more likely to support a ceasefire than Protestants and other Christians. Any ideas why this might be the case? And I think this is a really important question to think about, not just the Jewish respondents and the Muslim respondents, but also these other groups. I think it requires more research, but one thought that came to mind was, Jesuits and leaning towards social justice might be some of the reasons why we might see Catholic respondents. Also, I think that, and I wrote about this in the op-ed that I recently published on the first report in USA Today, that you know, Palestine is not, it's not just Muslims and Jews who have a connection to the area, but it's also a large Christians have a strong connection to this part of the world as well. So this is something that I think both warrants more in-depth examination, but I do think that that could be one of the potential reasons why. And I can take the next one. So I have a question about that I come from a university background and what can be better done to protect both Muslim and Jewish students who are protesting on campus today in the encampments and in other forms. And so thank you so much for that question. I think this is where the data is incredibly important to think about how our universities responding to student protests. And so I'm going to put on a little bit of my academic hat here to respond to this, because last semester I was on campus as a chair of a department and a professor. And I think that in my years in academia, one of the things that I noticed is that when it comes to Muslims and the issues that maybe Muslims care about or facing, that's often not been brought up in efforts to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in this moment, when students are protesting, the university has not thought about how to respond to some of the issues that Muslims are facing. And these are non-Muslims too, like you state, Jewish students as well, who are also protesting. So I think one thing that needs to be done is that we need to look at the policies on university, colleges, and campuses and how they respond to protests. And, perhaps not, is campus security calling in local policing? What are some of the things that the university needs to do? And I know that universities are thinking about this, because not all universities are, having police come in to disband the protesters. So this is something that absolutely needs to be considered and discussed. And some of it is just keeping in mind, what are the issues that Muslims and Jewish students are facing on their college campuses. So, okay, let's see.
I can take the next question. The questioner asks, I noticed a discrepancy between your data and data from other Jewish and Muslim organizations regarding the percentage of discrimination reported. Can you explain? Well, without having the specific data in front of me that you're referring to, it's hard to give an answer, but there's a lot that could explain it when it comes to sampling and polling. It could be as simple as the question wording itself. Question wording does make a huge impact on how respondents answer it. And so it's often, it's typically not recommended to compare responses to differently worded questions. It could be the way the poll or the sample for the poll was recruited. So the sampling methodology also can impact results. Sample size can impact results. The timing of the question, the timing of the poll and when it was fielded may also impact results and explain differences. And so I would recommend looking sort of there's a lot of polling data coming out right now. And so looking maybe at patterns rather than specific numbers might be a good point of recommendation, as well as kind of looking at everything in context of each other and not necessarily doing direct comparisons of all the numbers. But if you send me, the specifics of what you're referring to, I'm happy to answer that via email.
Okay, I can take the next one, Erum. So the question is, what is the best way to share this data with local boards of education and high school public schools in our local districts, especially where there had been reports of anti-Muslim hate, discrimination, and Islamophobia? That's a great question. So I would say, if you have access to parents who are involved with their local schools, that's one way to get this to your local schools. We also have an Islamophobia toolkit, which would be really combating Islamophobia toolkit, which would be really great for schools to have, because just like universities and college campuses, I think that they're at a loss of how to address this increased spike in anti-Muslim hate and discrimination. So for example, I attend school site council meetings. I go to my daughter's high school, and I have shared ISPUs, not only the reports on the anti-Muslim discrimination, but also the Combating Islamophobia Toolkit, which is really useful. Everybody's been telling me it's really useful to them to help with that. So, Erum, do you want to take the one on
Yeah, so there's a question, the data coming from Muslims and other groups are self-reporting, correct? Yes. So our poll was administered via a web survey. So, respondents took the survey online and gave their own, so it's all based on self-reports. How likely are Muslims to self-report discrimination rather than other ethnic religious groups? I mean, I'd honestly have to go back and see if there's any methodological studies done to kind of answer that question. So it's difficult to answer off the top of my head. But I think, all I can say that all survey participants, regardless of, religious or ethnic background, were given the same survey. And it was, fielded at the same time in the same methodology. So all were kind of given the same survey to complete and base that on their own self-reporting.
Okay. I think I can take the next one. There's a question about other groups that have come out with reports on anti-Semitism. I think that I haven't read all the reports to date. So one of the things that I think needs to happen is that we need to, one, understand what anti-Semitism is, and two, understand what Islamophobia is. And I think most, just like, Islamophobia has not been included in a lot of the regular DEI programming over the last, 10, 12 years. I think neither have we seen a lot on anti-Semitism. And so this is where these need to be defined. And then I think what we're seeing, though, is it's true that, after Trump was elected as president, we did see a spike in anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim racism. And so both were coming actually from the same places in a lot of cases. So threats at mosques, threats at synagogues. So, and a lot of that was coming from um, known white nationalist groups. So these are things that some people are studying and definitely need more examination and understanding. So.
I can take the next question. Is there a way to replicate your study in the local school and county district? You can replicate it in terms of the questions asked. So on the via the link being shared in the chat, you can access in Appendix A, Appendix 1 is the Appendix 2 is the questionnaire that we use. So it has all the wording of the questions that we asked in this poll. So you could use those questions or a subset of those questions. Obviously, in terms of methodology, it will be different, but if you want to ask these same poll questions within your own locality, you can access that via our website.
I wonder if you could respond to the other religious groups that were not included, like Buddhists, Hindus.
Yeah, so similar to what we do in our American Muslim poll, because of just the sampling, the sizes of those other smaller minority religious groups within the U.S. faith landscape, we were not able to do our breakdowns by those just because of the sampling sizes or the sample sizes are too small. And so that dictates what groups we're able to report on.
Take the next one. So the question is, the stories that seem to be coming through in mainstream media in regards to student protests is focused on discrimination Jewish students are feeling. How does this data in this report help highlight what Muslim, Arab, MENA populations are facing? Well, I think this is the main issue, is that there hasn't been a lot of data on what Muslims and Arabs and the MENA population are experiencing. So when, you're at a university or a college campus and, they're hearing about, they don't have the data to show them that this is actually happening at such a high level. And as you can see in the report, it is higher than all other groups that Muslims are experiencing it. So the hope is that this report will help to show that, while the media might be presenting one story, or that there's more to it, and that this report helps to provide a more nuanced picture, but also show that also the Muslims are experiencing this at an incredibly high rate. So that's the hope, that this will help in that sense. So there's another question about, there's a lot of focus on Jewish student safety. Has there been any polling that asks similar questions of self-identified Muslim students? In your poll, you referenced discrimination, which is distinct from safety. To my knowledge, Erum, I don't know if you know, I have not seen anything on that, but that is a good point and something that should be really thought about more. We need to look into that more. What do we mean by safety? What do people mean by safety when they say that they feel unsafe? As a college professor, I heard a lot of this. I'm not safe in this, and so we talk about it a lot with our, as faculty and with administrators. Well, what does safety really mean? And I was actually just in a meeting recently discussing like what does safety mean. So this is something that definitely requires more examination.
I can take the next question. Are you counting anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitic discrimination? So I'm assuming you're referring to the last set of data that Saher presented on the experiences with religious discrimination. Again, the question wording is available in our appendix, but we didn't get into the specifics, or we don't provide definitions. It's really a self-report of experiences with religious discrimination, however the respondent sort of interprets or internalizes what that means to them.
So there's a question about what Arabs or Muslims are claiming to be white. We need to delve deeper into who's identifying as white and who's identifying as Arab. That's something that we talk about a lot. When it comes to racial and ethnic identities of Muslims, this is something that Arabs have been classified as white, and now the census is going to include a MENA category. So this is something that we are going to look into deeper in terms of who's identifying as Arab and who is identifying as white. I don't know, Erum, if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, we have some previous work on that. At ISPU, we do, in our categorization that we offer survey respondents is to select Arab, but there's also still the white category. And so we've done some analysis and descriptions of who are white Muslims. So hopefully we can link those in the chat or send them out, send those pieces out in the resources in the follow-up email as well. I think there's a question, do you break down where the self-reported discrimination takes place? I.e. schools versus the workplace. So in these questions, it was, again, it was a quick turnaround survey. So we didn't, have as many questions to get into all the details of it, but in a lot of those questions, schools and the workplace are sort of lumped together, but where you can make that distinction is when you identify someone as a student. Of course, many students are also working, so again, it's a little bit difficult to tease out in this, whether it's happening at school or at specifically the workplace.
Erum, do you want to answer the inferential statistics?
Have you done any inferential statistics to disentangle some of these effects, i.e. race, age, religion? We were hoping to do some breakouts that way, but again, our sample size was limited. And so that's why what we're reporting on today are just sort of the, breakouts by religious group and by, age. We didn't have the sample size to do breakouts by race.
I'll take this question. I noticed the general public and Jewish populations have similar response about American support for Israel than Muslims. Any comment or interpretation about if they are living in two worlds of information media? That's a great question. It was not asked on the survey, but that's definitely something that people should explore more in terms of where people are getting their information, whether it's social media, particularly X, versus reading the mainstream media and how that influences their attitudes and views on a lot of these issues. So that's a great question. I'll take this one. What is the responsibility of universities in protecting their own students from unfair targeting, disciplinary actions, and arrests? It seems like it's universities versus student rights. Right now, do the schools have a duty to their students, especially when it comes to upholding their free speech? And this is something that is a great question. The report doesn't answer this question about what are universities' responsibilities, but I think we'll see as all of this is unfolding right now that this will be a question that people are going to start asking. What are students' rights? What are the rights around free speech? So I think this is a question that we're going to see people engaging in much more with much more detail and hopefully with more data to answer this about what the responsibility should be of schools in protecting their students. Yeah. Is there any research about Islamophobia and anti-Muslim speeches coming from non-Abrahamic religious prejudice? I that's a good question. I'd have to think about that a little bit more before I feel like I've come across some stuff. So if you want to email me, I'm happy to respond to that question. But we didn't include those groups in this survey. So please email me. Okay. I think that's it, Erum, unless you see anything.
There's one, has there been any research on hate bias reporting behaviors of self-identified Muslims?
Oh, has there been any research on hate bias? Um, Not to my knowledge. I don't know. Not that I'm aware of, but that doesn't mean that it isn't out there. I just might not be aware of it yet. So, but that's a good question. Yeah. Okay. I think unless there are any other ones, I think we covered them all, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we've covered. I don't know if you want to leave us with any closing thoughts on the, or reminders for how we can use the data.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that one last question quickly, if okay. Cultural Muslims, there was somebody who asked, is there any data on people who identify as cultural Muslims? We do not have that data, just to be clear. So these are people who are identifying as Muslims. We didn't ask them, how they identify as Muslims. So we don't have that data. So if you could please fill out this poll that we have, that would be great. It's in the, you should see it on your Zoom link. We really hope that you will use this report and share it with your networks. We would love to see it get out to policymakers, the media, journalists, school boards. We know that this is a very difficult time, and we are hopeful that this data will help in some way. So please do share it, and please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that we were unable to answer in this webinar. So thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate it.